Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Dr. Samir said, we organized a pre-conference brainstorming session, which has of a select representative of our community from the research and policy community. And we discussed the research agenda, the existing research agenda, and the range of issues that were suggested to us by the community of the research fellows and others from the wider economic professions. Actually, we have written to all the research fellows and many notable economists about our existing research and what are the issues and themes that they would think would be of high relevance to the MENA region, thinking ahead in the light of the fast-moving global economy and the advance of the new industrial revolution. And we received very substantial contribution thanks to the fellows and the other contributors. And we classified them into two main categories. One category constitutes an articulation and enhancement of the existing themes. And I will come to these themes very quickly. And another set which we deem to be new issues or issues that actually are not fundamentally covered. They might be linked somehow to existing themes, but they do deserve a more fundamental focus as new themes. So the purpose of this meeting really is to reflect upon what we have done so far, and you will see that it is quite a tremendous and commendable effort, and to think about the future, think through about the future in terms of how the ERF might continue to become as it is and improve and become relevant under the changing environment regionally and globally. New challenges, as we know, for our region, 100 years after the dominance of the oil era. What does the future hold for us as a region and as people? And then the second thing is unfortunate, hopefully transitional issues associated with the Arab Spring and the aftermath of the Arab Spring, and then the violence that engulfed some major countries in the region. And then, of course, the continued issue of youth unemployment. So these are all issues that, we need to be very diligent about addressing them in a knowledge-based, rigorous scientific research and effective policy uptake and outreach. We will talk about the research strategy very briefly, ongoing work and planned projects. And then we also discuss the new proposed themes. And then at the very end, we'll touch upon the research management processes or research modalities and how we might actually kind of go into a new or consider a new model or new regime of building new modalities for financing and conducting research, in addition to the multi-year research modality that we have now. In terms of the research strategy, a key new feature of the ensuing programmatic landscape, which is started in the context, we started implementing it in the context of the ERF strategy 2017-2021, is built around what we call synergetic interfaces between standard research, capacity building, and policy outreach modality. And this is essentially the bedrock, the cornerstone of the ERF research strategy, which is looking at, for example, research through competitive research, as well as high-end multi-year research and open access data. This is the fairest building block. And then we have the capacity building, through the annual conference, and I think now you pretty much appreciate the significance of this particular conference, because we moved from the predetermined themes into, if you will, endogenous determined themes that actually reflect the interest and the relevance of the issues for the region. And that's why we moved from the 6 predetermined themes, such as labor and structural, and sectoral and macro and micro and trade, into issues that are much more nuanced, much more cross-sectional, such as, for example, a theme on growth, or a theme on development strategy, or a theme on effectiveness of subsidy and social solidarity. And these are the kind of issues that I think are now very relevant for the policy debate. And this conference earmarked this major transition. Then we have also, in terms of capacity building, technical workshops that we organize in order to promote the technical skills of our research community. And then the third pillar is communication and policy outreach. And we have various modalities: national policy dialogue, senior policy seminar, hopefully in the future. And of course, we launched 15 months ago the policy forum, which is kind of the crown jewel so far of the modalities, the outreach modalities, and until, for example, we managed to do the policy seminar, which will be a much more active engagement between the research, ERF research, and our policy community, as well as the private sector community. So this is one key element that we would like to synergetically interface with what we call self-standing, thematically cross-cutting initiatives, and I will articulate this in the context of the GCC. So focusing on a sub-region or a group of countries, such as the GCC, and just, kind of razor-sharp kind of focus with analysis of issues that are in the active debate in these countries, most notably oil, youth, employment, transition to the knowledge economy, issues of immigration, remittances, and social contract, and these kind of things. And this is, for example, would open an opportunity for us to engage in terms of partnership with, say, GCC universities and research centers, but then the ultimate objective is to integrate this research community or nascent research community into the mainstream body of the ERF research at the regional level. And then responding to emerging challenges. And we have done this through a project that is dedicated to conflict-affected Arab countries. Countries that are plagued with civil wars, such as Syria, Libya, Yemen, and to a lesser extent Iraq, but it's one of them. So we have these 4 countries. We organize a major research agenda around it, and it's an opportunity to thank IDRC and Ford Foundation, obviously, for taking the lead in supporting this initiative. Obviously, in addition to our host, the Arab Fund and the World Bank, and the other donors and future donors for supporting the entire infrastructure, obviously. And then another consideration is to close gap in research capacity and policy outreach, and that is evening the process of research inclusion in terms of gender as well, and we have done much better on this than the other gap, which is the regional gap. So in addition to GCC and the conflict-affected countries, which hopefully will do a lot, we are also thinking about the Maghreb countries as well, and maybe some other marginal research countries in terms of their contribution to the ERF. So this will be the key focus, these synergetic interfaces. Very quickly, you can see, for example, this is actually hard to see, but if you look at the horizontal line. This will be the standard thematic research, macroeconomic and natural resource and structural resource management, structural transformation and growth, employment and human resource development, equity, inequality and inclusive growth, political economy, conflict and post-conflict transition and peace building. So these are the 5 major projects that are currently, conducted in a multi-year fashion and receiving the bulk of the funding and the effort of the research community. So, for example, a GCC initiative, we would select certain, and then of course there is the open data, initiative. So they will select some issues like, for example, macroeconomic and natural resource management will figure very prominently for the case of the GCC. Employment and human development will also figure very prominently. Perhaps equality may be important, but not necessarily very important, but maybe social solidarity may figure there, and so on. So this is the idea. Then some other potential cross-cutting themes could be, for example, regional public good and regional cooperation in the Nile Basin Initiative. This would be interesting between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia in terms of building regional public good or regional cooperation in the context of the Maghreb countries. This could be a self-standing projects that can actually build upon the systematic kind of research that we have been doing in the context of the thematic research. In terms of the thematic research itself, I will go very quickly because these are research that we have been doing and well known to our community. Starting with labor and human resource development, this is actually a very important theme that considerable capacity has been built around it, both in terms of surveys, labor market surveys and household surveys, as well as, of course, considerable research. Since the beginning of this theme, we have 117 projects and held 41 events and several books and very large number of working papers covering the themes, the topics of assessing the impact of labor market regulations, labor market dynamics, understanding the impact of incentives in higher education, inequality of opportunity, youth vulnerability, and more recently started demand for determinants of demand for labor, and using, of course, very sophisticated econometric techniques and data in order to test hypotheses and develop evidence-based policy conclusions that would feed into the policy dialogue. So this is kind of an example of a very significant investment that have actually produced considerable products and facilitated engagements and so on. The new issues, topics that we thought could still be covered under this theme. There is a lot of commentators who said emphasize education reforms and the quality of education, including investing in children, especially the young age between 0 and 5, and its implications for the cognitive ability at an older ages and so on, and job creation demand side, so which means that there is a call for increasing more and more resources and research on the demand side. And then, of course, the health inputs over the life cycle, and it is links to productivity and labor and personal and family welfare, understanding low female unemployment in the MENA region. And of course, fortunate that Professor Raja Asad is here, who has been leading this important theme for a long time, and will be taking account of this, I'm sure, and we will be giving it priority going forwards. The other theme which is another major theme on equity, inequality, and inclusive growth. These have produced 152 projects and 16 events. This is another bedrock of the ERF research, measurement of inequality, of outcomes and opportunities, continuing to pivot towards policy drivers of inequality, building on policy drivers work to explore aware program on the political economy of policy reform and inequality, so linking political economy with inequality, rural inequality and poverty, rural-urban migration, and the balance between rural and urban development, especially spatial inequality. The recommendations here for adding new themes include poverty and social protection, which is really a very important issue, because social protection is a very big policy concern in our region. And then also a cross-cutting issue with the conflict and peace-building project is what role can social protection play in reducing social tension and conflicts. The third theme is natural resource, structural transformation, and growth. This is obviously a very important topic that produced 93 projects and 17 events, another major initiative. MENA region, and I should say that Paul Magdisi, who is here with us, has been a very effective leader, and he just came recently to lead this initiative, the initiative I mentioned earlier about the inequality. This one on the macro, 93 projects and 17 events, led by Kamiyar Muhaddis and Diya Nuruddin, younger macroeconomist who holds a lot of promise to lead us further into the future and account for several new topics and new themes under the emerging new normal in the macroeconomy and the industrial revolution. So the MENA region and the new normal in the global economy. This is a new theme that has implications for the growth potential of MENA and the macroeconomic management. The issue of climate change and macroeconomy is another issue that is still, hopefully will be considered, funded and considered soon. Already work has been done on structural change and growth dynamics in the MENA region, national oil companies, and the history and the political economy of national oil companies, fiscal institution, sovereign wealth fund, monetary regime, understanding and avoiding the oil curse. Considerable work has been done on this. But this particular theme received a lot of ideas, new ideas, such as a project on MENA after 100 years of the oil era, looking at the economic history of the oil era, the science and economics of the oil supply, global oil supply, especially the shale oil and gas and the future of the MENA economies, the new industrial revolution and the future of the MENA economies. This would be one cluster. Issues related to the divergent monetary policies, such as, for example, between the US, the anchor countries, and the GCC economies, which peg to the dollar, except for Kuwait, which peg to a basket. Tightening monetary cycle in the US and its implications. And then expanding and enhancing the research on firm dynamics by accounting for industrial organization, labor and trade issues in terms of its implications for firm dynamics and productivity, finance and the interaction between the financial and real sector of the economy, and then the issue of indebtedness, which is coming again. It has already became very big in Africa, in many African countries, and now it is also emerging as a major issue in the region. So the understanding sustainability of debt and debt dynamics is very important for sustainability of growth. And then there was a lot of discussion about the need for multidisciplinarity, especially in terms of understanding the economic history of institutions and how, what lessons that can be gained from this. And then we have a new project on conflict. How are you doing with time? Okay, fine. Huh? The new project on conflict, post-conflict transition and peace building. And we are very fortunate to have Professor Samir Maghdisi to lead this in collaboration with a host of researchers, because it's a new area on which the ERF, obviously there was no need to invest on it, but unfortunately now we have to invest on it. It's just started, so we have 3 projects and 3 events. We started off by asking 3 fundamental questions. Why some MENA countries, or specifically Arab countries, became conflictive? What are the causes of conflicts? And this is a huge literature that need to be articulated in the context of our countries. And what should be the governance structure, both economics and political, in socially fractionalized conflictive society in order to facilitate the transition from war to peace? And then finally, what should be the post-conflict development agenda, both at the macro and micro level, and the reconstruction program in these countries? And then we have several other issues pending. We already, these themes have been researched, and case studies and thematic papers, and very importantly, involvement from researchers from these countries, from the 4 countries, which actually serve, first of all, creating knowledge about this development challenge, but also building capacity and enfranchising researchers from these countries, which obviously the research community, like any other aspects of the country, has been affected by the conflict. There will be analysis of householding conflict in this year, looking at survey data, building on surveys that's already been done, for example, in the context of the labor theme, on refugees, who are they, the impact of war, for example, on household, on women and children. And very importantly, here we are doing a multidisciplinary kind of cooperation with the Arab Reform Initiative, which is a political science network, to look at the role of women as providing bonding capital across social groups, and therefore promoting peace. And there are lots of interest on this using microdata. And then there is the issue of estimating the cost of violence, political violence, in terms of physical capital destruction, as well as the impact on the human and social capital, and then thinking through what kind of growth strategies that would be needed. And here comes out the role of the repatriation of refugees. Repatriation of refugees is very critical, because if you take a case like Syria, Syria actually resembles Germany, World War II Germany, where because the German population, obviously affected by war, but they remain intact. So immediately after the end of war, once the Marshall Plan started, the country was able to grow very fast. Syria have received considerable physical capital destruction and dislocation of population. Unless the repatriation of refugees, at least from the neighboring countries, and physical capital, and dislocation of population were addressed, the expectation of fast growth will not be there. There will be very pessimistic expectation if something like this did not happen. So it will be interesting to do research and use it in order to inform a useful and informative policy dialogue. And then, of course, there is a political economy of the business networks, and also the interest of the regional and global powers around conflictive countries and so on. So it's a very rich program, and it's still nascent program, and it will continue with us for some time. But there are also new ideas that were suggested, such as institutions, policy, and climate change in MENA induced drought, civil war. Actually, the struggle over natural resources can be a cause of conflict. And then the cross-cutting issue of social protection and its potential impact in reducing conflicts. And then a more multidisciplinary approach, looking at the involving historians, political scientists, and other social scientists on this issue. Okay, I'll go fast. Then there is a political economy, which is another major initiative. 157 projects and 27 events, and Ishaq Daiwan has been very ably leading this initiative, using value surveys and an Arab pulse, and very creatively putting together various projects under two main new themes: the political economy of state-business relations and the pulse of the Arab street. And on this one, the focus so far has been on the micro kind of aspects, using FAIRM and using, opinion surveys. But there is also a feeling that the political economy of macroeconomic policy is very important in this region. Political economy of social sector, public finance, budgets versus subsidies, political economy of fiscal dominance and exchange rate regimes, and these are very important issues. I will go very fast, Mr. Chairman. I will just list issues that we are considering, such as water, agriculture, climate change, and sustainable development. These are on the drawing board. There is a proposal to do a major research in collaboration with our sister organization, in Sub-Saharan Africa, the African Economic Research Consortium, and the Clermont-Ferrand Research Center, FERDI, with the support of the World Bank, in the context of the World Bank initiative on Africa digital connectivity. And this is potentially a very promising project that will actually earmark an era of deep collaboration in the context of Africa, looking at Africa in a continental, as a continental kind of economic bloc. There is the issue of regional public goods, that the digital connectivity is one of it, but I already mentioned like Maghreb region, Francophone Africa economic cooperation, or the Nile Basin economic cooperation. So these are all issues that we are thinking about, and we don't have to wait until we get major funding to do a multi-year research. We can actually consider these as potential projects to be considered as topic for proposals of panels in the annual conference, next annual conference, inshallah, or, for example, as small projects just to highlight the main issues in context of approach paper or concept papers, and then using that in order to consider a more involved multi-year research projects. There is the issue of sustainable development goals. And again, the World Bank is interested on this. There is a trust fund managed by or supervised by Dr. Mahmoud Muhiddin, who was here with us, Senior Vice President for the World Bank. And so we are making an effort here also to mount a research on inclusive growth and inequality in the MENA region, covering cases of 3 countries, as well as another important aspect, which is climate change implications, looking at the impact of sea level rise, as well as the impact of rising temperature in the context of Egypt, Sudan, and Tunisia. And we are hoping actually to move forward with this project, which will be in collaboration with the MENA region of the World Bank. Now, in terms of the new proposed themes, we have 4 themes: globalization, digitization, and development; cities, urbanization, and spatial development; refugees and migration; and randomized control trials. These are themes that we deem to be deserving of independent consideration, and we cannot really be subsuming them under the existing themes. And again, the same applies to this. In terms of that, we will be looking to actually include this as among our mainstream activities, budget or funding permitting. But then we will not be deterred by waiting for major funds to come. We will try separate modalities, some of which we are already started discussing with some universities and some institutions to, to address them. I will just 5 minutes, if possible, and then, or 2 minutes, okay. So globalization, digitization, and development, like the crisis of liberal democracy, slowdown of globalization, the rise of the East and China and the Silk Road, automation and digitization, and so on. Cities, urbanization especially, this is very important because now there is a lot of emphasis on the role of local governments and cities, and the role of big geo-reference satellite data and interfacing it with socio-economic data to understand the impediments to development in sub-regions and so on. And then the issue of refugees and migration, I already spoke about that. And then evaluating programs through randomized controlled trials and some other new waves and so on. And hopefully we might be able to organize something on this, because this is now the grain of the profession. Perhaps maybe we'll organize a special workshop or an activity to introduce these new techniques and these new issues to the network. And finally, let me say that we adopt a participatory management. As you see, the competitive research, I will speak later today about the review process and the involvement of very large number of research fellows and other scholars in evaluating the research, and then as well as the thematic leaders that I mentioned for the multi-year research programs. And we will be continuing to actually pursue this participatory research and add new modalities such as partnership with universities and research centers and so forth. Thank you very much.